Ooh, yeah. Welcome to the 16th episode of Shot Nostalgia, where we continue our drive back into the history and fully immerse ourselves in a timeline. We are continuing this journey throughout Saturday night's main event. And for the first time ever, we're hopping through the most amount of time we've ever gone through, 1992 to 2006. We're covering the big landscape, the gap in time from when we finally saw our last episode of the original vehicle of Saturday night's main event ending on Fox. And then when they reinvigorated it on the drive to WrestleMania 22. A lot of ground to cover, of course, in the newsletters. As you can see, if you're watching on video, I'm also Mr. Solo Dolo tonight. It is Mike Belcaster's birthday, so happy birthday to Mike Belcaster, enjoying himself out there. But here on Friday, we're holding it down on the drive to the finish line, which is season 5 of Shot Nostalgia, and what a ride it's been. And like I said, guys, you guys are going to be checking out the 2 episodes tonight. Saturday night's main event number 31 on November 14th, 1992 from the Hulman Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. And we're also covering Saturday night's main event number 32, March 18th, 2006 from the Cobo Arena in Detroit, Michigan, headlined by Shane McMahon and Shawn Michaels in a street fight. Like I said, it is 2 weeks prior to WrestleMania 22. So the landscape's different, really setting the stage as the propaganda commercial machine for WrestleMania. We'll get into that for sure. And that first 1992 one we're going to be covering tonight, WWF Championship match, Papa Shango and Bret Hart in a killer match. And like I said, a lot of years have passed, and we're going to be seeing, hopefully, the return of Saturday night's main event, the vehicle that we know and love, nostalgia based on Peacock, with that new TV deal being signed. We heard there's going to be a 4-part throughout the year, so maybe in 2024, we're going to get more clarification on that. And listen, I think we willed it into existence. And we're going to be reviewing all the tapings, the newsletters, context each week to update you on all the happenings. Like I said, we have 3 episodes left, this one and 2 more. And we're out of the woods, which is the 90s. We're now in the nostalgia vanity project of Saturday night's main event, where they reignited this platform for the nostalgia of it. And I think that sells, as we spent 5 seasons talking about nostalgia, and we know how far it can go. But that became sort of just, now it's become a tribute to Saturday night's main event. I'm sure we're going to see more of that if they decide to restart the franchise of Saturday night's main event down the line in the upcoming year. But that's what we're seeing here in 06. And really, they're floundering in 1992 because it's starting to lose its luster. 1992 is a transitional year by all accounts in the company. And we watched last week, we covered the 2-part. And again, hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to us talk about those events. We had Matt from Extra Cooler on, so make sure you guys check that episode out if you have not checked it out. But we saw the final episode of Saturday night's main event on NBC, and then the transition of Fox, which the whole presentation changed. It was Fox's really entry point into what became this Fox Sports huge piece of dipping their toe in the water and seeing what it is. And I mentioned before, the Fox we know today with the NFL and the platform that is sports, that wasn't always the case. They were sort of figuring out who they were identity-wise, identifying that they wanted to have live sports. And similar to the landscape here in 2023 going into 2024, live content sells. And I think Fox got their hand in there, and they, the relationship continued. Obviously, all these years later, they were the proud owners of SmackDown, and they were the highest bidder. And we know that relationship will continue down the line, even if it isn't going to be the same SmackDown that we know and love. Obviously, they transition with the new TV deal, but it kind of feels like history is repeating itself. And as we continue to go through these nostalgia seasons, and now we're in season 5, all these things are sort of repeating themselves. And it's going to be interesting in these next 3 episodes. Of course, I'm here, Mr. Solo Dolo, tonight talking about it. But we're going to be covering the 2 episodes next week are just 07. And then the last episode, the finale, will be 07 and 08. And I remember watching them live. And again, like, it's a different feel to it because this is a nostalgia vehicle. It's not so much used as the main platform of storytelling with Raw and SmackDown doing the heavy lifting over there. But we'll be curious to see how it compares, especially with the other Saturday night's main events so fresh in our head and with these cards to review. And this is going to be the most interesting episode I think we've ever done here on Shot Nostalgia on Turnbuckle Tavern, because like I said, the divide from November 14th in 1992 and then driving all the way to March 18th, 2006, all that time has passed. So much has changed. The company shifted in so many directions. We bypassed the Attitude Era. We bypassed the New Generation. And here we are in the Ruthless Aggression Era in 2006. The John Cena era, really the PG, the start of the PG era. They're kind of saying goodbye to that. There is Definitely a lot of edgy things in 06 that we're seeing here, whether it be Edge and Lita, whether it be Mick Foley and Edge getting ready for that street fight, the John Cena stuff. There's some stuff going on with Booker T and Sharmell. They are eventually transitioning, and I think 08, 07, 09 starts to be the real PG era that John Cena kind of takes hold and they buff out all the edges. But 06 they're shaking off some of, the resistance of trying to let go of the Attitude Era. You really see some of that here. But 06 is definitely an interesting time, and I love diving into it because it was a time that I was definitely into the product, and one of my final years of being die hard as far as product back during those years. And 06 is so fresh in my mind with Edge emerging as the heel, and it was so cool to see here on this basis. And again, we'll get into that, but let's cover the groundswell of everything going on from 1992 to 2006 with the newsletter and see what Dave had to say in November of 1992.
Happy Hour.
All right, here we are in the happy hour covering the newsletter from November 16th, 1992. And we're starting it off with Jake Roberts. And not good news here. And again, this is like we could build the context and understand that Jake Roberts did get better. And this was the start of it. Jake Roberts checked himself into the Betty Ford Rehab Center this past Tuesday, and his future with World Championship Wrestling appears bleak. Meltzer continues, the 37-year-old Roberts' real name, Aurelian Smith Jr., son of Jake Grizzly Smith, one of WCW's road agents, had been pushed as the promotion's top heel since arriving on August 2nd. They go on to talk about how Roberts missed a lot of his matches doing color commentary and decided that he wanted to be getting himself right. So we talked about it last week about not only the steroid issue, but the wellness policy across WWF at this time became prevalent in the early 90s, and WCW on the other side was a little bit of the Wild West. So it's interesting to see here. And the only reason I'm really covering it is that they are doing their part to, try to make sure their talent's okay. But if you notice the wording here, it's that Jake Roberts checked himself into, and who knows if he was influenced by WCW management. But when you're missing dates, of course, you're going to be pressing their hand to figure out what is going on. So Meltzer continues, from this point forward, word was given not to mention his name, which indicates his chances of being brought back are low. Jake Roberts is scheduled to remain in rehab through November 23rd. At this point, it is uncertain what direction his wrestling career will take. Roberts has been through rehab at least once while in WWF and had been suspended for failing drug tests during his WWF tenure on at least 2 occasions. All I can say is thank God for DDP Yoga and getting his life on track and figuring out. I mean, he's still with us today on AEW television as the manager for Lance Archer, and his brain is still very much an asset to any locker room he's in. So the fact that we still have Jake is a testament to, surrounding himself with the right people and taking a good first step here. And of course, there'll be other lows throughout these years, but the fact that he gets himself in a good spot starts with decisions like this. But we also have the Mountie is officially gone since Rick Martel will replace him for the title matches with Bret Hart at the California house shows this weekend. Meltzer continues, however, that's yet to be announced on TV. So unless he's just going to work the final pay-per-view date, I'll assume that means Mountie versus British Bulldog is also off for Survivor Series. So he also continues, want to know how Kamala got his name. He said Jim Harris came into the Memphis territory about 10 years ago, and Jerry Lawler had the idea to make him a savage. They saw the name of Dr. Kamala in a National Geographic who was researching in Uganda. They did a video of him stalking around Jerry Jarrett's backyard, and the rest is history. So I thought that was interesting as well to throw in there. Sometimes these names come out of nowhere, and there it is right there. Someone happened to be watching National Geographic research in Uganda, and the Ugandan giant Kamala, therefore he's born. We also have some talk about the Tatanka versus Blake Beverly match on 11-7 Orlando had an unplanned finish as a top rope snapped and Beverly took a nasty fall to the floor and couldn't get up. Thus, he lost via countout. I remember I think it was a year ago at this point, Bobby Lashley, and I think he was wrestling Sheamus. It was a match that happened at a house show and the top rope snap. So very scary stuff. And obviously we talk about unplanned changes, unplanned finishes, and that was a topic of conversation during the presser post Survivor Series, talking about safety of the wrestlers, and most notably Triple H talked about Rey Mysterio getting concussion. They changed the finish of the match. There's an example right here on a lower scale. Obviously, Tatanka and Blake Beverly didn't really have a lot of stakes, but clearly they had a pivot from what their original finish was. So we also have more stuff about Titan building a 45,000 square foot warehouse in Trumbull, Connecticut to house a mail order facility to handle merchandise. So they're also planning on growing the company a little bit bigger. We see them kind of taking the steps in that direction. And it starts with infrastructure. And if you ever drive in Connecticut, Stamford, with the WWE warehouse, or the WWE office, I should say, it is definitely larger scaled and much nicer than it was originally, with the glowing lights. And it is, I mean, if you've ever driven past it, it's in the middle of a residential town. Like, legitimately driving down the street, there's just neighbors with, normal everyday houses. And then there's this monstrosity with the parking garage with the WWE offices. So, but yeah, they're planning on building more things to handle the infrastructure as they continue to grow in a different direction. We also, finishing up the newsletter from the 16th, we have a record called Slam, sung by several WWF wrestlers, will be released in England on November 30th and is considered to have a good shot at being the Christmas #1 pop song in the country. Interesting. So we have all these other music. The WWE, the music, WWF, the music back in the day used to be well sought after, especially for those that were not around when streaming wasn't around and CDs were a big deal. But we always talk about the music and the wrestling connection. Entrance music's important, but there was always this allure of having music and having wrestlers sing songs, and it always had some appeal. And they went to the well a few times, and 1992 was ripe for it, with the cheesy soundtrack and especially the cartoony look, as we saw with the Saturday Night's Main Event from this 1992 episode. Just all the cartoony logos that appear on the screen, and just how kid friendly this is, and this feels right in line with exactly what they're going for. Moving to the November 23rd, 1992 newsletter, Meltzer says the worst thing that could happen to a promotion short of a scandal would be a pay-per-view main eventer walking out last minute. He continues, as everyone knows, that happened twice last week to Titan Sports, as both Ultimate Warrior and British Bulldog quit the promotion in moves that appear to be unrelated, except that they both happened within a day of each other. He continued, this forced Titan to come up with an emergency angle that aired Monday on Primetime Wrestling, turning Mr. Perfect into a babyface and teaming with Randy Savage in the Survivor Series main event against Ric Flair and Razor Ramon. All right, so everyone remembers Ultimate Warrior walking out famously. I mean, it's been in the cycle of conversation right now, especially with rehabbing relationships with people that have damaged relationships with the promotion. Of course, obviously CM Punk coming back and making amends, but we reference Ultimate Warrior as an example that hell has frozen over once before. Bruno Sammartino did the same thing. Bret Hart. The list goes on and on, but this is a shot across the bow as far as their relationship, and one of the big reasons that things sort of spiral out of control, and why they decide to split ways, at least aesthetically, with Ultimate Warrior for a long period of time before he comes back prior to his death, before his Hall of Fame or after his Hall of Fame induction. But I think a lot of people lose sight of the timeline here, where British Bulldog and Ultimate Warrior walked out within days of each other. So this is a huge blow to storytelling, but also to the roster, two top guys. Meltzer says, although both men were said to have been fired by the company, other sources claim that each quit. He continues, a little of both, although in the case of Warrior, it was more quit than fired. The Warrior situation wasn't unexpected, but Davey Boy's situation came with little warning. He continues, some within the organization expected Warrior to be history before the TV tapings in Canada, which saw Bret Hart win the WWE title and have Hart and Savage as a new tag team in Survivor Series. When that didn't transpire, it was given that it was because so much had already gone down to the advertising pay-per-view, it would be easier to bite the bullet and wait until after the show to make any changes, but that Warrior would likely be history shortly after the pay-per-view. Clearly, there was a spark that was lit that Warrior and WWF were not getting along, but the stuff with the British Bulldog underneath. And I think because of the volatile relationship with the Ultimate Warrior, no one really remembers the negativity surrounding British Bulldog, especially as he hopped from WWF to WCW and vice versa. And I think a lot of the fact that he was a top guy, definitely during this time. He's always around the main event, not a WWF champion per se, but he definitely headlined pay-per-views. If you think back to SummerSlam 92, he was a huge piece of what they were doing in 92. Meltzer continues, that wasn't a definite, even though they were given the indication that it was since Warrior was still being planned to headline house shows in December. They started an angle at the last TV show to start a new program with Nails, which would have died at the gate. However, it didn't hold together since Warrior quit 17 days before the show with no reasons or plans known other than that he was going to try to merchandise himself independently. So we saw this with Warrior. He tried himself to create the brand of Warrior with the comic book, wanting to create himself larger than life. And the creative differences that happen, and we hear them obviously through the lens of WWE and other people around the company about how difficult Warrior was to work with and just how out of touch with his value to the company was. And you could see even in 92, even watching the opening match of Saturday Night's Main Event, he's teaming with Macho. And of course, the Ultimate Maniacs feel like a big deal. But just, within a short 2 years, less than 2 years, you see that so much has changed. We had the conversation at length last week when Matt was on here talking about how really Warrior was given up on, and maybe rightfully so, but they definitely pivoted given the WWF Championship going into WrestleMania 7 to Sergeant Slaughter. And you can make the argument that was circumstantial because they wanted to capitalize on outside, cultural events with the Gulf War and being able to get legitimate heat. And they wanted to go into an edgier angle, but you could see maybe, there was some things boiling under the surface with the Ultimate Warrior that he wasn't their guy. And yes, they gave him the rub at WrestleMania 6. They attempted it. They had him run through the summer with the championship, wrestling Rick Rude. But his draw was not as immense as they thought it would be in comparison, especially to Hulk Hogan, and they gave up on him. So I'm sure some of that frustration boils from there 2 years ago. And then on top of it, making that he's difficult to work with just makes it, the writing was on the wall. But we also talk about Davey Boy Smith, and a lot of this conversation, again, most of the conversation people hear about 1992 and walking out, you think about the Ultimate Warrior. But Davey Boy Smith was a huge loss too. And Meltzer says, Smith attempted to leave the WWF on good terms, although it doesn't appear that many consider the situation all that good. Aside from the Survivor Series problem, the promotion gave Randy Savage and Big Boss Man time off after the Survivor Series. Warrior and Bulldog were the top two headline babyfaces on the two touring shows, causing the company to be forced to revamp much of their plans in the winter quarter. In addition, Warrior was going to be a focal point of WrestleMania's main event, most likely, so Plan A is out the window. So that's a huge piece here. Ultimate Warrior being pushed in the direction. And if we look at WrestleMania 9, what would have been the plan for Ultimate Warrior? Would he be focused around the main event? Would it have changed? Would we go into WrestleMania 9 or past that with Ultimate Warrior as a champion? Maybe they were being forced to, especially as they talked about, which a lot of the conversation doesn't go around. But the other thing you have to talk about is Randy Savage and Big Boss Man having time off as two of the top wrestlers on the promotion. When you have these international dates planned, house show plans, and tickets are being sold, especially in the lead up to a pay-per-view, and we have two of your top guys leaving, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth as the promotion goes. But Meltzer continues about Bulldog, saying he'll apparently start in January with All Japan. WWF sources had said the problem with Smith was he wanted superstar treatment because he felt he was the Hulk Hogan of Europe, which he pretty much was. At some point, it would be no surprise to see Davey Boy return, as he's quit the promotion twice in the past year when he tagged with Dynamite Kid. Both times mainly work in Japan and Calgary, and both times eventually return, although the second time took a few years in between tours. Before we get back to Warrior, Davey Boy Smith does return, and it feels like it's no worse for wear. They just kind of expect it. It's almost the same thing with Jim Neidhart, where you hear the stories all the time where you'd have Stu call up Vince McMahon and ask him if he has anything for Jim Neidhart, as he calls him Rhino, and he brings him back. And I think that's sort of the flow of relationship. But even though he kind of tried his best to leave on good terms, he left them holding the bag, especially when you put a lot of stake into Bulldog. He wanted to be considered the Hulk Hogan of Europe. He's featured on these international tours, and he bails. And I mean, who's to say what was going on behind the scenes, that he wasn't getting the superstar treatment he feels like he deserved? Who was right, who was wrong. And we saw that he was a draw in the UK. He did main event that SummerSlam 92, record-setting attendance at the time. And he was, again, a top guy. So you want to be able to advertise yourself and get yourself in the best situation possible. And that's what he had to do for himself. But as far as Warrior goes, and the tails all this time, and I think they wrapped it up in a neat little bow, and they put the whole propaganda machine behind it, with creating the Warrior Award post his death, and with all the stuff going on with, the Hall of Fame speech. They gloss over this, but this Warrior stuff here is really the root of the issue, which of course you talk about the difficulty to work with, but when you hold up Vince for money and decide that you're not going to do business, it's a really, really bad deal, especially when, Vince is relying on you. And Meltzer continues, Warrior's career, at least regarding the Central 2 U.S. box office, looks to be over, at least at the present. Eventually, almost everyone always comes back. Bob Backlund, for instance, that's his decision, while some suggest WCW try and sign Warrior when he gets his release. It would only work out if he'd agreed to a salary structure and demands. So he starts to eulogize Warrior's run throughout WWF. He does return. Everybody returns. And I guess this is the theme. CM Punk making his return at Survivor Series. no one's ever truly gone. No matter what happens, they can make amends do business if it all works out circumstantially. But Meltzer says Warrior didn't draw with WWF, and he wouldn't draw with WCW either, nor would he have the right to use the name Ultimate Warrior, whose main appeal he currently has is simply the name being over. His substantial muscular size that got his name over isn't there today and couldn't be regained under normal circumstances. That's not even getting to what he can do on a nightly basis at the house show once the bell rings. Meltzer continues to talk about really just moving towards work rate, that Warrior doesn't fit into the scope, and his main appeal, and again, tying it all together, conversation we had last week about steroids and the emphasis on making sure that the wellness policy is in place and really testing these guys to make sure that they're not using steroids and, all the other things that go into it. Biologically, his body got smaller, and that was part of the main appeal of him, and they moved away from it. And I think with the fact that he couldn't work paired with the difficult attitude, it's a concoction to create just a volatile mix of a human being that no one wanted a piece of. And of course, again, he wanted his way back. He works in WCW. We see that awful match in 1998 with Hulk Hogan, and we see him return to WWF again. He comes back in a short structure. And again, everyone finds a way back if the business is right and the circumstances are there. So he continues in the newsletter talking about the physiques all going down, and guys like the Legion of Doom, Hulk Hogan, Warlord, Barbarian, Chris Walker, Sid Del Wilkes, Bulldog, the people most likely have started to get a little bit smaller because they can't use, and Meltzer calls it men's shrinkage in muscle size, body weight over the past few months. And it's directly correlated with the steroid testing. And he says it's changed the entire face of the promotion. So this is a huge thing. And again, you could talk about, was it sort of intentional? Was it a part of their plan to originally go with smaller size wrestlers? Probably not. But the benefit was twofold. You got better work rate. Guys like Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, even we talked about Mr. Perfect, wasn't a champion, but he was still featured in a big way in the main event. Ric Flair. These guys were all big pieces to the main event that maybe wouldn't have got a chance if steroids weren't taken seriously. And I think as a culture, they were forced to do that. And I think maybe it's a chicken or the egg situation. Would they have decided to move in that direction, or were they just forced to? And I think Matt said it best last week. Seems like they were forced to. So Meltzer says the business being down by even more significant percentage than the physiques of the wrestlers has been more of the same, and shows the time frame that many fans jumped into this because the physiques jumped out. When the physiques weren't there, they left. However, there's little choice because the impressive size for size sake now is only there in your earthquake types. So now something has to be pushed. The overly creative gimmicks like Papa Shango and Nails have been a total failure. So it's either try ability or throw darts, or choose who you push by whose name is on a dartboard, i.e. random choice. In reality, this steroid story has resulted in some of the most widespread changes in the face of the number one promotion in the country than anything this side of Akira Maeda's charisma, leading to the switch and emphasis on submissions in Japan and the Hogan Road Warrior influence changing the U.S. business 9 years ago, has done so over the past 10 years. He finishes talking about Michaels and Hart being featured, and talks about how good it's going to be on pay-per-view, and talks about how the work rate's been better. And even though business is down, trusting the process of looking towards the growth of the company, not only the wellness of your athletes, but just the product on screen will eventually bring people back. And he talks about ultimately the changing laws and enforcement, outside pressures, and the inability to tell the truth from WWF is the reason why they decided that they had to do these things, and they were forced to. So, I think part of the conversation too, outside of, and I keep going back to a work rate, the conversation that we're seeing here in the newsletter is probably the same one fans are having. Meltzer says, but even with the WWF title that should be by all rights the best title match on pay-per-view regarding match quality in WWF history, the show is loaded with question marks. Hart and Michaels aren't being pushed as the main event to begin with, and one wonders how much interest that could generate as far as turning into dollars. So we're seeing right there, and this is a conversation that still continues today. People have the conversation about AEW putting on. I still distinctly remember the Vikingo versus Kenny Omega match there. It was put on TV, and people were complaining about it because it wasn't built up to this big match leading to the AAA champion versus Kenny Omega, the legend, the living legend on the AEW roster. And the work that they did in this ring was absolutely stupendous. It was unreal. But the argument was that that type of match is never going to draw money in a big scale. It's always going to be larger than life characters. And again, you can have this conversation over and over again. It's a debate that can happen amongst friends and elsewhere. Wrestling fans among everywhere have this conversation. What brings people in the building? I guess you can make the argument these larger than life characters, the sports entertainment, these romantic angles have always been at the core of really the boom periods. And, you know, as far as other cultures of wrestling, the respect of the bell to bell, the Japanese style, the Mexican style, the British strong style, that type of wrestling is never going to draw in the mainstream as far as the casual audience goes. And I think really what happened here, as far as WWF, the silver lining, the byproduct, the consequence of having to test these wrestlers for steroids and eventually getting them to ultimately stop, gave us a better product on screen. And honestly, created lifelong fans like myself that fell in love with the product by watching guys like Shawn Michaels and watching guys like Bret Hart continue to grind it out on a nightly basis and bring some respect to the in-ring product, because it just wasn't there. As we discussed, from 1985 up until this point, work rate was just a godforsaken thing, never talked about. It just didn't exist. There was matches on a one-off where, you know, we would get the Brain Busters going out there and crushing it with the Hart Foundation, and that was awesome. But that was definitely the outlier. The most of the matches we were seeing were these squash matches, these guys that were just very limited in the ring. And point in case was Ultimate Warrior as the champion in 1990. I mean, even it's not even like when they gave the title to Sergeant Slaughter, the work rate went up. It still sucked. It was still Hogan versus Warrior, you know, esque. It was Sergeant Slaughter, and that was the cartoony characters that got people into the door. But I think also seeing the business going in a different directions, it just, you know, they are throwing things at the wall, and the benefit was we got really the establishment of the work rate we know and love today, and eventually created this WWF culture that decided to push guys based on different looks. They didn't have to be these muscle bound guys that eventually would fizzle out because their bodies couldn't maintain the work rate. But we continue. I mean, he has this great thing in here. We can also read it for days, but Meltzer is talking about the cable companies were sent an overnight message on 11/11 to pull all video and print ads for the show until new ads could be sent out. Obviously, that with the changing of the top stars, they have to figure out a way. And this is not social media age. You can't put something on Instagram or X or Facebook and just right or wrong and just say this is what needs to happen. But, you know, this is advertising. And sometimes we talked about this with the VHS releases months out. They had talent on there that just wasn't included on the card. And that's not what you want. So there's a lot of conversation here about making sure they're advertising, at least at the very least. They're trying to be genuine and getting the right things on the card so people don't buy the pay-per-view and they're misinterpreting what was going to be there. So we're talking about the Saturday night's main event on Fox, the 1 hour primetime special, the one we're going to be covering today, aired on 11/14. Meltzer said it was a good show due to Michaels' performance in the IC title match and a typical good production. They plugged Warrior and Savage as a team for the entire show, except the very end, which has a brief bit where Heenan suddenly heard a rumor they wouldn't team up, and they left it at that. In other words, casual people who don't watch religiously would have picked up on it. Those who do not would see it as a step one in the angle. They also, during the show, plugged Bulldog versus Mountie, which made no sense since they weren't even with the company. And you can't even say there were financial reasons for trying to steal based on bait and switch, since that match isn't going to draw any buys on its own. Meltzer says it could have been edited out since at least some of the commentary was done after Bulldog and Warrior were gone, if not all of it. And Meltzer says, I can't believe it was a mistake to overlook something like that, because that doesn't happen on TV with this company. He said, the only thing I think is the sheer arrogance when it comes to getting away with it. So, you know, as I'm giving them compliment for trying to fix the ads leading up to Survivor Series, making sure the right talent is on there, they didn't go back to Saturday night's main event and fix it. And this is already after Warrior and Bulldog had left. And Bulldog's not even on the show. But, you know, that's a big conversation we continue to have down the line. I mean, when guys are out and they're no longer with you have to go back post-production and fix it. So Michaels won the IC belt from Bulldog at 10-10. Talked about how great the match was. So a big conversation going into that. And then also talk about the match with Papa Shango. I guess we're going to go through that as well about the match. A lot of good stuff there with, you know, obviously Papa Shango, an underrated worker, of course, everyone remembers as the Godfather most notably, but Papa Shango, the gimmick was underrated. And I think it could have had a lot of length on it, like the Undertaker gimmick, if it would have been at a different time. So Meltzer says, with Warrior leaving without notice, Titan was forced to bring Undertaker back too soon to headline the California shows against Nails. He also continued to talk about Undertaker being in great pain throughout these matches. We know he's a lifer. We saw him work the 1998 King of the Ring with a broken foot. He's always been a company guy. And for reasons like this in 92, 2 years into his tenure, they're like, we need you. And he showed up even though he was hurt. So they also, WWF continued to kind of deal with a lot of the backlash of Warrior walking out, because in Los Angeles, there were heavy chance of refund, while in Oakland, they drew a smallest crowd since WWF had gone national in the Bay Area, and there was really no fan reaction at all. So they're trying to wade through this waters of really the circumstance of what happens when your top stars leave. We also have the Jesse Ventura lawsuit happening here. And we know that he left WWF and now he's suing Titan Sports. It's scheduled for February in federal district court in St. Paul. Jesse claims that he's entitled to residuals on what estimates about to be 140 videotapes in which commentary appears. Jesse, who worked as an announcer for WWF without a contract, claimed his agreements as an announcer on TV. Saturday Night's main events and pay-per-views were all for the event precisely, that he's entitled to residuals for any use of his commentary for profit in any other avenue. So this is eventually the split between the two of them. We know the relationship was good. He was a huge piece of WWF coming up. I mean, the vehicle that we're talking about now, Saturday Night's main event. And the split was very public. And really, this is a benchmark for future wrestlers and their rights to their characters and their names worth. And Ventura talks about here in the newsletter, he's disputing that traditional wrestlers' status as independent contractors, claiming that the wrestlers are giving a schedule, told where to be, when and what to do, and when they get there, and even suggested to do things like lose, which affects their marketing value, which is a classic employer-employee relationship, and not independent contractor work. Meltzer continues, Ventura also claims that his loan contract signed in 1985 was done in Milwaukee when Gorilla Monsoon approached him with 3 or 4 things to sign, which he wouldn't do. As he was about to go to the ring, Monsoon told him if he didn't sign, he wouldn't work, and Ventura claimed he was specifically told Monsoon when he was signing the contract he was under duress. So all this stuff is going to come to light during this court case with Ventura and WWF. This is always the conversation, and it continues today with the workers' rights for WWE and WWF, and things have moved in the right direction. But Jesse Ventura knew his worth. I mean, he also talked about here, the actors with action figures made up in their images receive 25 to 30% of their merchandising, and he's comparing it to Hollywood, while the wrestlers' percentage is nowhere near that. He also told that unauthorized use of his photos and likeness on 2 calendars, gum cards, and other dolls. So he's comparing it to the other marketplaces, and wrestling for so long was under a different tent than Hollywood and other TV shows would be, and he just wants his fair share. So that's a big piece that we're talking about here. You know, Jesse Ventura continues to, try to figure it out, and he goes to the mat for himself mostly, but by proxy makes the wrestling world better for everybody else because it puts WWE, WWF on blast here. So we jump 14 years in the future. 2006, we go to March 16th, the newsletter that dropped here. And we have WWE moving from Spike to USA on 10/3. Meltzer says the ratings were virtually identical in the same time period on Spike to October, November, and December. And there's a slight increase when you factor in 2 special shows. They talk about the death of Eddie Guerrero, really as the increase of the show. And kind of talk about the other characters going on here. As I mentioned before, you have Edge and Lita. There's certainly a thing here. Edge is throughout his heel run. He definitely is coming off the Rated R Superstar berth and a little bit of Edge. But Meltzer says the growth internationally, merchandise in places like Italy and the UK over Christmas and 19 international house show dates generated $8.36 million. That can hardly be attributable to being driven by the network change. When they went over from Spike to USA or USA to Spike and vice versa, and again, it's applicable to today. You have a core audience that knows where to find your product, especially in 06. This is not the same landscape we're dealing with today. But the point still remains, like you kind of lose sight of there's casual audiences that just happen to be turning the channel and finding you. And when you move that channel, sometimes those people don't come back. Meltzer also talks about in the newsletter just about the star-driven business since the dawn of time. Obviously, WWE wants its investors to believe that the stars are just widgets, that breakthroughs in marketing and make the difference. But Meltzer, there's this big insurance call an investment call. 45 minutes. And there's so many notes here that I could sit here and read them through with you, but it was also a turning point for the company. In 06, they aren't quite where they are now, but they're quickly approaching it. I mean, if you remember when WrestleMania 22 was still running an arena show, this was not a stadium. This was kind of run an arena where they just run Raws and SmackDowns now. So keep that in perspective as they've moved in a completely different direction. But in the 45-minute call, the only wrestlers whose names came up were Kane and John Cena when talking about their movie releases, not about wrestling. They also talked about Stacy Keibler, and Stacy's name came up only from an outside caller who's noted that she is a hot TV star. Will she be using some big angles? And the question was answered with non-committal and says she's been gone a while. We're going to have to wait and see if we could work her back into our stories. A lot of the conversation had stuff to do outside of the ring, and isn't that appropriate to where they've started to move? Talking about the movies that Kane and John Cena in. I think See No Evil was Kane, the Marine being John Cena. A lot of the conversation wasn't about the on-screen. There was a lot of conversation about really just the outside of the ring stuff, and that was the 45 minutes worth of conversation. So it just kind of showed you their focus was moving away from wrestling at large. It was more just about what can we be more entertainment-wise. And just wrestling becomes not only just secondary, it might be third on the list of things that are important to them. Meltzer also continues, indeed, when the subject of WrestleMania came up, Mike Selleck, the company's CFO who presented the results, predicted it would do more buys than any WrestleMania in history. So it would have to crack 1.05 million to hit the projections. And he says better marketing, more international buys are expected, and more product exposure from the March 18th NBC Saturday Night's Main Event. All of those factors, particularly the middle one, say that they should have a total number of views that is more than any WrestleMania in history. And Meltzer also says the name WrestleMania supersedes the attractions on the show, still sets records. It'll either because matches click or because when they're there or not, people will buy the show believing Bret Hart, Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin are appearing. And he says the wide variances in buys of WrestleMania throughout the year show the wrong attraction. On top can't be saved entirely just by the name WrestleMania. And I wonder if they moved in that direction. I mean, that's a conversation we continue to have, but he cites 1997 as a prime example. 2003 is the most obvious recent one at this time. 97, obviously, they went with the main event being Taker and Sid. And that's, not quite the draw. Maybe if you would have angled it Austin and Bret, maybe it would have, advertising wise, it would have been a little bit better. And same thing, obviously, Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar. Maybe they thought Rock and Austin, I don't know, the way it was advertised could have been, a little bit, a little bit more successful. But looking at a lot of the stuff we have at WrestleMania, and I think even at this point, they're recognizing they're without their main star. I mean, John Cena at this point is approaching to be their Hulk Hogan, but right now they're kind of running a utility where they're more of a team approach and they're leaning on the brand. And this is, I think a lot to be said, especially in the beginning of the call where they're not talking about wrestlers. They mentioned Kane and John Cena in passing and wasn't to do with wrestling, that they believe the WWE brand is bigger than any one wrestler. And I think we've moved in the other direction now. I think some of these guys have surpassed really just, especially the stars in 06, like a Roman Reigns. How much does he resonate outside of the company walls? How much does he resonate outside of the wrestling fandom? I mean, that's a hard conversation to have, especially for those that are in the bubble. We're all sitting here in the bubble, and it's hard for us to say. But we could see the mindset is the brand WWE, the letters WWE are bigger than any wrestler. And then that kind of speaks volumes of their approach for the next 17, 18 years. That they believe no one is bigger than the brand, and they move in a direction where they're not going to put all their stock into one person. They have to have ulterior motives and figure out ways to have these other plans. Gone are the days where you're going to hitch your wagon to a guy like Hulk Hogan. Yes, Roman Reigns is the guy, but there are 1A, 1B, 1C plans beneath him that if Roman Reigns can't wrestle tomorrow, they're going to be just fine. And that's because of the infrastructure they put in place. So, they continue to talk about this. The company took, a lot of the profits they discussed here and moving in a direction that we know WWE to be right now. And this just is, it's very fascinating to see in 1992 where attendance is down. They're trying to redefine who they are. In 06, it's not a booming period, but they are certainly more in line with figuring out who they are. And it's an alignment with whatever the culture becomes today, where it's more business. And like I said, it's more of the cumulative approach. It's not just nearsighted. They're not talking about the one-off WrestleMania. They're talking about the next 5 WrestleManias. So that's a really good conversation that they had there. But, finishing off here in an interview on 227, we have conversations talking about, a lot of stuff with Marty Jannetty. And Marty Jannetty came back here during the build to Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels the next year, and Marty Jannetty getting back into shape, and he's looking to get back onto the roster. But there's a lot of stuff with, Jannetty claiming that WWE was working on taking care of his legal problems, and if they could be brought back, which is 180 degrees different than what Meltzer said he was told. We do see him return in the coming years. So, or I think he was actually, I apologize. He was back the year before on the build up to the WrestleMania 21. So he had just been gone. So right here, Marty Jannetty angle was gone. Most figured it would wind up with him turning on Michaels is out the window. Jannetty's problems resurfaced after TV this past week. He was let go. So the creative team devised a storyline involving Jannetty as part of the Vince Shawn buildup. When John Laurinaitis was told about it, he contracted Jannetty and found out because of his legal problem from last year, they put him in jail and cost him his previous chance with the company. So that's exactly what it was. So they left him. I mean, he got a second chance here, and who knows what could have been. He could have rehabilitated himself and found a way to have some legends run. We've seen guys with lesser talent find a way to continually have a spot on the roster. So, yeah, I mean, Marty Jannetty is gone now. He went on an internet rant about Meltzer making up a story without giving one example, according to Meltzer. Meltzer says that Jannetty claimed his parole officer wouldn't let him go into Birmingham, and that's why WWE let him go. And that was also technically incorrect, according to Meltzer, because he was not released from jail and out on parole until after. And Meltzer says our first report was he was fired, and it was not a storyline report because of inaccurate firing. It was a discipline situation that he had been scripted into the March 6th show, that the writers had to rewrite the segment. They were told he was never being brought back, and never is that word where everyone smiles, because we all know there's no such thing as never in wrestling. And to rewrite the segment in a manner that's not built for return was told Vince McMahon was shooting when he would use the line Marty Jannetty would never be seen on WWE television again on Raw. Meltzer says we don't have details first regarding the nature of the violation. We know that his transgressions continue and other things have come to light since then, but very interesting time, place, 06. What a weird time to be a wrestling fan. But that's the newsletter here. We're going to get our fix. We're going to get in there. We're going to start in 1992. Then we're going to get to 06. And we're going to talk about all these Saturday Night's Main Events, all the great action. Let's get our fix.
Get your fix.
All right, time to get our fix. WWF Saturday Night's Main Event number 31, November 14th, 1992, from Terre Haute, Indiana, the Hulman Center. This was taped back on October 27, 1992. Our current champs are as followed. Our world champions, Bret Hart, he won it back on October 12th, 1992. Intercontinental champion is Davey Boy Smith. He won it back on 8/29/1992. Our world tag team champions are Money Incorporated, Ted DiBiase, and IRS, 10/13/92. And this is the final episode of Saturday Night's Main Event as we know it. It'll be brought back in 2006. We're going to cover both here, right here on Shot Nostalgia. So here we are with our hosts, Vince McMahon and Bobby Heenan. And our opening match is the Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage taking on Money Incorporated, Ted DiBiase, and Erwin R. Shyster for the World Tag Team Championship. So to build some context here, the Ultimate Maniacs, and of course we covered in depth that Warrior walked out of the company, so this is short-lived. And we're not going to know a lot about this, but since SummerSlam, Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage have become the best of friends here, and they've deemed themselves the Ultimate Maniacs. You've seen the logo. I'm sure some of you guys have seen it here, and this is sort of a dream team for casual wrestling fans to see the two of these guys together. And it almost seems like the beginning of this mega power stuff with Randy Savage, that they can kind of really encapsulate this really great build and find a way to rejuvenate both of these characters and have a renaissance of popularity, but it just wasn't to be. Maybe they tried to do a little bit more with Ultimate Warrior, trying to figure out a different angle to elicit sympathy, especially now that he's becoming a little bit more one-dimensional, even more one-dimensional than he is, especially since his in-ring work suffered, but he's smaller. He's wearing a singlet. It's not the Ultimate Warrior that we all know. And this, it's sort of the byproduct of what's going on here. The culture of wrestling shifting. But they start the match hot. The Maniacs come in the ring. They clear Ted DiBiase and IRS out. And we also have Heenan using, a lot of his comedy in here to make up for the lack of work rate in this match. And we have Randy Savage atomic dropping DiBiase into Warrior for a punch. A lot of tag team stuff, a lot of chaotic sort of smoke and mirrors here. DiBiase, goes in, he ducks low off a whip and takes a suplex. And all while this is going on, they do a picture-in-picture situation where Ric Flair, Razor Ramon, and Mr. Perfect are looking on from the dressing room, and they are kind of playing into this angle while this match is going on, and they are talking about how the Maniacs are not going to be surviving at Survivor Series. And while the match is still going on, DiBiase has Warrior on the ropes right now. He pops in the $1 Million Dream. Looks like he has Warrior kind of worse for wear. And then Savage comes in, breaks up that hold. We get a double clothesline. We get a hot tag to Randy Savage. The place goes nuts here. Love Randy's gear, by the way, rocking the red and yellow. Hits the Macho Elbow. And then everybody kind of comes into the ring. And the champs decide to leave and decide to stay outside and not risk losing their championships. So the Maniacs go after Money Incorporated, and they get attacked by Flair and company and make it 5-on-2. So we get a count-out victory for the Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage. But of course, we all know, lifelong wrestling fans here, titles can't change hands on a count-out. So kind of a good thing. It would have been one other title. You have to figure out a way to get off of the Ultimate Warrior. So no worse for wear. And this match continued to, it was fun. I mean, it was 6 minutes and 11 seconds. Like we said, there's a lot of good stuff here, especially with Bobby Heenan on commentary, a lot of good characters. Randy Savage and Ted DiBiase doing a lot of the heavy lifting. IRS not terrible in the ring himself. He's definitely on the back half of his career, but he definitely held his own. But like I said, this was just campy, bubblegum type of stuff for an opening match. And I'm sure as a kid, you probably ate this up. So we also get this Bret Hart music video, and we have it set to Tom Petty's Making Some Noise. So this is kind of similar to that WrestleMania 9 music video they show. The song doesn't really vibe with the music, but at the same time, it's 1992, so kind of take that into account. We lead into our next contest here, and probably the match I was most looking forward to on this card, especially with the in-ring action. It's Shawn Michaels taking on the British Bulldog for the IC Championship. And so to set the stage for this is Shawn Michaels has been chasing that Intercontinental Championship for nearly 6 months at this point. And British Bulldog has been featured in a big way. He's someone, as we just saw, SummerSlam 1992, getting the victory in front of all those fans at Wembley. And we talked about in the newsletter. He is a guy who walks out, and creative plans have to change. But clearly they saw Shawn Michaels as someone they wanted to build around. And Shawn Michaels, where we last left him, was a tag team guy, and he's had that heel run, and we saw him kind of emerge as he emerged as the Shawn Michaels of the Shawn Michaels and Mark Jannetty team, but to the point where that's used. Like, that's what we talk about, because Shawn Michaels was just he outshined Mark Jannetty by that much. But this match had a lot to it, where they let these guys go out there and cook. And man, this is a really good match by two guys that really know how to put a good match together. And they let these guys go out there and have a 10-minute spectacle on TV. A lot of really good stuff showcasing what both these guys can do. And this would be a quality match on any TV show. If, Shawn Michaels and British Bulldog, they'll definitely do it again. They'll have matches for the WWF Championship in a different land, in a different era in WWF, where Shawn Michaels is champion and British Bulldog is coming in the challenger. But these dudes really knew how to work. And I think really what I thought most about this is how underrated Davey Boy Smith really is, and the ability for him to go out there and tell a really meaningful story. And Shawn Michaels in his own right is just such a natural. This is a great, great match. And even the ending was great too, where Shawn's going for the cross corner whip. Bulldog does reverses and sends Shawn up the top rope. We get Davey Boy Smith going for that superplex. Davey Boy Smith has given out, and they were telling that story throughout the whole match. Shawn falls on top of him for the 1, 2, 3. And I mean, this is really, really great. Like, like I said, there's the story in between where Shawn's untying the top turnbuckle pad. And that's, telling the story where he's going to utilize it to win the match. And once Bulldog's back in, Shawn stomps in the back. He hooks the abdominal stretch. We get a Bulldog hip tossing out, missing an elbow, and Shawn goes for the back ab stretch, really focus on the back. Davey hip tosses out again, and this time it connects with the elbow drop. He then throws Shawn into the corner for the patented flip. And then Davey Boy Smith delivers a catapult, drills him with a clothesline. He then really, what costs him is he hesitates to pin. And then delayed suplex gets 2. And this is where it kind of gets discombobulated here for Davey Boy. He goes for the cross corner whip into the exposed turnbuckle. Shawn reverses it and sends Davey Boy into it instead. And that's really what caused his demise. Like I said, the superplex, back gives out. Shawn falls on top for the 3. And after the match, like a really good heel, Shawn puts the turnbuckle pad back where it belongs. And Shawn, this is his first televised championship win. And of course, we talked about Saturday night's main event. The Rockers did have that win to the tag titles, but didn't get added to the record book. So this is a big deal. Shawn Michaels' illustrious career. This is his first championship on TV. This was a great match. And really, as I said before, with Davey Boy walking out, it's his last match with the WWF for 2 years. And he's going to debut in WCW at Super Bowl. So it's going to be pretty quickly. He's going to find a new job elsewhere, but he'll be back. The relationship, that door is always open for Davey Boy. Even though he left them in the lurch, they'll find a way to make use of it. And why not? Match like this, he can deliver. And this is one of the best matches that we witnessed here on Saturday night's main event. And what a shame it's the last time we see Davey Boy for a couple of years. But we get Gene Okerlund in the back with Ric Flair, Razor Ramon, and Mr. Perfect. Flair is on the mic saying that whoever wins the WWF Championship match Survivor Series gets to take him on. Mr. Perfect mentions the Ultimate Maniacs. And Razor goes into, his own shtick here and says he's down for fighting in the streets, and they're getting their stuff in. And this is just to really build up the Survivor Series build. And, I think Ric Flair right now is biding time to get back into the championship picture. And same thing with Razor and Perfect. Everyone feels like they're a little bit discombobulated. Maybe that's just the build of Survivor Series, that they're trying to create this unity amongst guys that usually are one-off wrestlers. But that's, part of the build here, where we're so focused on those mini matches that everyone feels like it's almost just because we have to have these Survivor Series matches, they're all like within union. Of course, Flair and Perfect go together like peanut butter and jelly, but Razor Ramon fell a little bit out of place here. Which leads us to our WWF Championship match, which was Bret Hart taking on Papa Shango. And as I said, Papa Shango, everyone remembers, his in-ring career is mostly as the Godfather. But the Papa Shango run, different place, different time, could have the same reverence as a character like The Undertaker. Really, the voodoo thing really was one of a kind. And I really enjoyed what Papa Shango brought to the table. But just to talk about Charles Wright for a second, his ability to vary himself up and be dynamic. And like I mentioned before, going into the Nation and Domination, becoming the Godfather. Then he goes to Right to Censor. He has the ability to be this legitimate tough guy in all circumstances. And he's a guy that, IC champion, longevity, a WWE legend by all accounts. And I really enjoyed Papa Shango. Like, I think he fits this era of wrestling. And like I said, I think if you would have brought him back, and I know there was conversation in 98 to bring him back, there's a way to bring this back where it didn't have to be goofy and campy. Because if you look at the trajectory like The Undertaker and compare Undertaker from where he is in 92 to where he eventually goes, I think there's a way to adapt the Papa Shango character to make it a little bit more contemporary. And they never went that route, unfortunately. And who knows? The success speaks for itself. The Godfather, like I said, former IC champion and very memorable in his own right. I don't know, Papa Shango character is cool, and it was awesome to see him have this match for the WWE Championship. And of course, Bret Hart does get the win. But I got to say, what a fun match. This was really, really good. 7 minutes and change of just really great action. And, I think a lot of the stuff with Bret is working from underneath. And of course, Papa Shango over 300 pounds and the bigger guy in this match. Bret works so well when he's working from underneath and having to overcome the adversity. And his ability to sell and just kind of overcome, like I said, and even the finish of this match where Shango has him on the ropes. Like, he has him beat here where Bret really just gets out of the way of that running clothesline that we eventually know is the Ho Train, but he still kind of keeps the same moveset here. And he hooks the sharpshooter in last second, gets that submission, and that saves him here. But to me, Bret Hart, like I said, a match like this really showcases what he's able to do. And, Papa Shango, Godfather, whatever you want to call him, good father, was always a serviceable worker, but he rose to the occasion here. And again, dance partners make all the great matches, but Bret Hart definitely brought the best out of him. And looking at this match here as a microcosm, a lot of fun. These are the reasons why I love these Saturday night main events. And Papa Shango, he doesn't get a lot of WWF Championship matches, and he felt like he belonged. And I think that's the best thing you could say here. And I love Bret Hart as the champion here, man. This is an era of wrestling, like I said before, that the byproduct, the silver lining of all this stuff where the wrestlers are moving in a different direction is the smaller size, the more technical sound. And man, the matches Bret Hart is turning out with the likes of Papa Shango and eventually down the line working with guys like Shawn Michaels and just tearing the house out on a nightly basis. Wrestling was in a much better shape because he was champion. But moving on to this funeral parlor where Undertaker was discussing his upcoming coffin match with Kamala at Survivor Series. And as I mentioned, we talked about Kamala getting his nickname from Jerry Lawler from watching Dr. Kamala on National Geographic, the Ugandan giant here. And this is just really Undertaker building a special casket for Kamala. And Taker comes out of the coffin and he tells Kamala that he'll rest in peace. And that's pretty much it. But this type of stuff is haunting. Like I know Matt from Extra Cooler was talking about the segments with Taker and Papa Shango and all that stuff, that some of that becomes cemented in your brain as a kid. This to me was I almost remember watching this as a kid, even in a highlight of it. So Taker's ability to just be so creepy at the same time, and Paul Bearer is the perfect mix with him. It's absolutely fantastic. But we go to Gene Okerlund. He's ready to interview the champ. But Shawn walks in with his new IC belt, and he said he's going to beat Bret and become a double champion. And they get into a shoving match building up to their match at Survivor Series, which is so interesting, especially knowing the history with Bret and Shawn. And I'm sure that they looked at these two guys as up-and-comers, guys they want to build around. But it hits a little bit different when you know the history and watching these guys interact. This is, man, just magic on the screen, watching Bret and Shawn kind of just interact in any capacity, promo or otherwise. They just feel like they're made for each other. And I think every wrestling era would be better if you could find the counterpart to someone's Bret to their Shawn or Shawn to their Bret. And maybe, I don't know, and again, being a positive guy, maybe Seth Rollins can find that with CM Punk, with the real life disdain that they may or may not have for each other, and maybe can bring the best out of the characters. We'll see. We go back to Vince and Bobby, and Bobby's on the phone, and he says that Warrior and Savage won't be coming to the ring together at Survivor Series, and one of them will have a new partner. So this is what they're alluding to, that Warrior is no longer going to be with the company. So they're trying their best to save face, but it feels like, again, we talked about it in the newsletter, if the casual fans watch and they're probably just like, oh, they're building to more story, but they're trying their best to go back and fix things that not make it false advertising and get fans to feel a certain type of way about things. But I thought this episode was a lot of fun. I mean, especially as the quote unquote finale for what the vehicle of Shot Nostalgia Saturday Night's Main Event, the first half of it is. This was a really cool, we could have ended our season here. Of course, I want to talk about the more modern day ones, but this was a lot of fun. This set Bret and Shawn up really, really nicely for Survivor Series. And really, Shawn defeated the guy who beat Bret, earlier in the year. And I think that's a big conversation, right? Really smart storytelling. And the other main event with the Maniacs and Flair and Razor, because obviously Warrior walks out, so they have to pivot. And this is a really essential thing to watch. We wonder what could have been. We always talk about the butterfly effect, as cliche as it might sound at this point. Moving into Survivor Series 1992, there's a lot more questions than answers. And if Warrior didn't walk out, what were the plans? I mean, we saw in the newsletter, they had plans for him to main event WrestleMania 9. Is that true? Because especially the way WrestleMania 9 looks, it feels like they're moving in a completely different direction. I mean, remember, WrestleMania 9, it's Bret Hart and Yoko. You know what I mean? Maybe Hogan doesn't come out and cash in his proverbial money in the bank to get the win at WrestleMania 9, and people don't complain about it over and over again. But yeah, different world to think about, and definitely a different landscape if these things don't happen. But we jump ahead to March 18th, 2006, Saturday night's main event number 32. And all this time, man, Cobo Arena, Detroit, Michigan, attendance 7,000. And we're led in with the commentators. It's not Vince and Bobby. It's Jerry Lawler, Jim Ross, and Taz. And here we are. And essentially this is, as I mentioned before, this is a propaganda machine to hype up WrestleMania. They go through the list. The main event's going to be a handicap match between John Cena, Triple H versus Rey Mysterio, Kurt Angle, and Randy Orton, which I really like because it's both brands' main events. Like obviously John Cena and Triple H are taking each other on for the WWE Championship, and the World Heavyweight Championship is being defended from Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, and Randy Orton. And we also get word there's going to be a Shawn Michaels versus Shane McMahon street fight. And we get the lead-in, too, the old-school lead-in with these cold opens. And Vince and Shane promise to destroy Shawn Michaels tonight. They cut to Shawn Michaels. He says, if he's going to hell, Shane's coming with me. Then they show Triple H. He's cutting his promo, and he's cut off by Triple H. He's cut off by John Cena. John Cena puts his hand in his face and saying he's going to team up tonight. JBL says he's going to be challenging Steve Austin to a beer drinking contest. Boogeyman's coming to get us. And, man, I got to say, man, I'm sure watching this in 2006, these 15-second promos probably hit a lot different. People are really excited to probably see this. And this is especially now watching what we just watched for Saturday night's main event. They had none from the cold open from 1992. This is what you need, man. The return to NBC. I hope when they come back in 2024, this is what they bring us with, because it adds so much depth to the character in such a short period of time. Not a lot of effort. It's just like it adds a little bit to the show. It makes it feel big. That's why I like when Collision does it. They do it before the Continental Classic, the last couple episodes. It feels bigger. Just seeing the cold open, like what are they thinking going into the match? It just sets the stage of the faces you're going to be seeing throughout the night. So we get the opening sequence of all the pyro, and we lead right into this main event. As we know, historically, the setup of these nights are done so with the biggest match going first. And we have John Cena and Triple H taking on Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton in a handicap match. So this match is what you would expect, man. This is 5 Hall of Famers going out there and just tearing it up. There's a lot of storytelling gaga going on between, of course, the building up John Cena and Triple H. And of course, they're setting the stage, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, and Randy Orton. Nobody can coexist. But the in-ring action is solid, of course. And these guys are going at it. And Kurt Angle is definitely going out there, and he's a suplex machine. This dude is out there just throwing everyone that wants to go in his way. And to set the stage as well, just so you guys know, this is, if you forget, Rey Mysterio is going to win the championship at WrestleMania. And this is post Eddie Guerrero dying. And Randy Orton sneaks his way into this match by kind of disrespecting Eddie Guerrero. And that's really where the blood feud is. And at this point, the story is because Triple H obviously doesn't want John Cena to get anything up on him during this match. So we see this crazy sequence at the end where we get, at the time it's called the FU. Now we know is the attitude adjustment. He hits the attitude adjustment on Orton. Triple H pedigree Cena, and everyone's supposed to be shocked, but of course they're feuding. He walks out. He returns. He throws Orton on top for the pin, and Mysterio's like, I don't want the win this way. He pulls him off. Triple H comes back in. He pedigrees Rey Mysterio. He gets taken out by Angle, and then Angle gets hit with an RKO. You guys following still? And then John Cena counters another RKO into a roll-up. Really explosive finish. But I like the fluke idea for the pin. I really do, because it keeps everybody strong, and this is a challenging match. Of course, you could have went count out. You could have went DQ. Could have found a way to figure that out. But they went with a pin, and the fact that they went with a pin fluke, it just made sense to have all the insanity at the end, just the chaos. It just was explosive. And really, the story here is nobody wanted a team together. It was more of a spectacle seeing them in the ring together, which I appreciated on the stage. But they left a lot on the table for the WrestleMania match. And seeing that the main event is, both main events are teaming together. So, I mean, we did see Triple H attack Cena, but for the most part, you're not giving too much of your main event away because they're teaming together. So having watched this, it had you probably more excited to see them going in against each other, especially the animosity that was built from their inability to coexist. So we get a list of who's going to the Hall of Fame, and then we cut a Booker T backstage promo, and he's supposed to take on Booker T tonight. He's with the doctor, and Teddy Long cancels the match, and Booker T limps out of the trainer's room with Charmel. And clearly they're faking because they both break into smiles. And then we cut into this cutting edge segment. Edge and Lita, they come out to the ring. Great. I mean, they have such a great tandem together. If you forgot just how good of the chemistry they had together was, go back and check this out. They have a table covered in weapons. And of course, tonight's guest is Mick Foley because WrestleMania 22, they're going to be taking on each other in a street fight. So Edge wants him out here for a WrestleMania beating, and out comes Foley. And Edge lights the table on fire with gasoline. Foley turns it over and he beats the shit out of Edge before pouring out the thumbtacks. Lita gets a cheap shot in, and then Edge hits into Foley onto the tacks, and Foley has all the tacks in him. He gets up and he's smiling, and he chases Edge up the ramp. He hits a neck breaker on the ramp, and then he also hits a concerto to Edge. So, man, once Edge started talking, the whole thing was just about 6 minutes long. But, man, what energy for this, especially. I mean, you don't need even that much build, but they found a way to even get you excited. They could go in cold, even probably today. Edge and Mick Foley can have an awesome match, especially with all the risk they're willing to take, especially with tape. We eventually know that he speared that famous video now clip of Edge spearing Mick Foley through a table, flaming table outside the ring, WrestleMania moment for everyone to remember. And that, I mean, that's the build here. They alluded to it. They showed it here, lit the table on fire, which was awesome to see. They do this recap of Vince McMahon versus Shawn Michaels, and man, what a great video package here. They're referencing 1997 and the whole history of Vince and Shawn Michaels. And it's very, very well done. And of course, like, I remember watching this at the time and being upset, like, we're wasting a Shawn Michaels match. I mean, he's only at this point 4 years back from his return. So this is essentially his fourth WrestleMania. We're like, all right, we're wasting a match against Vince. But this wound up being really fun. WrestleMania 22, the street fight, again, with the stipulation and Vince's willingness to do whatever it takes to make a match entertaining. Even the build was fun. They found a way to, like, both these guys are just the utmost professional, willing to do whatever it takes to make things entertaining. And tapping into the history, especially with Bret Hart, like, all of that with the screw job, just all baked into this neat little package made for a really, really good story. So then we have Shawn Michaels and Booker T segment here where they're excited that they got out of the match and cue Boogeyman from the ceiling, and they run down the hall. So they're going to get their comeuppance from the Boogeyman. But we lead into this Steve Austin, John Bradshaw, Layfield beer drinking contest, which I'll be honest with you, like, was not looking forward to watching. It was cool to see Steve Austin back in capacity, but I'd rather have seen these two kind of go at it in a limited match. But of course, Steve Austin is pretty much retired at this point. I mean, we know he's come back since against Kevin Owens at WrestleMania 38, but Steve Austin at this point was inactive. So the beer drinking contest, I mean, I guess at this point, there is JBL on the mic talking about how happy NBC is to have him on the show. He insults Detroit, calls himself the wrestling god. And he also says he's going to win the U.S. title at WrestleMania and make everything better. And out comes Austin in the truck to cut him off. He gets a huge pop. Always great to see Austin in any sort of vehicle. Add beer into it. It's all sort of the Austin magic. And Austin gets on the mic. He says it's good to be on the show and back in Detroit. And he doesn't understand why JBL challenged him to a drinking contest. And he just thinks that, like, there's got to be some other ulterior motive. And then JBL goes into a rant about how Austin tries to buck the system. And he says these are going to be the rules for the contest. So JBL has Canadian beer, and each have 25 beers with a minute to drink. And JBL insists they go back and go back to back so they can't look at each other. JBL is, at this point, you can imagine he's pouring his beer on his shirt. Austin's actually drinking. While JBL's not paying attention, Austin walks around, and Austin's like, okay, clearly you are cheating. Out comes Benoit, because this feud is happening for WrestleMania. He throws JBL back in for more beer dousing. Of course, JBL gets hit with the stunner. And then we get Austin posing, building up this JBL versus Chris Benoit match at WrestleMania. Kind of a wasted segment, of course. I mean, you look at back-to-back here. We had the cutting edge, and then you have the beer drinking thing. I'd imagine maybe at the time, fans are probably excited about this. But if I was structuring this card, I would have found a different way to put it. It definitely felt like, again, like a commercial for WrestleMania, I think is the best way to describe it. They show Candice Michelle and Victoria admiring Candice Michelle's Playboy cover, which I forgot that she was even in Playboy. But they have this women's match here. Mickie James and Trish Stratus taking on Candice Michelle and Victoria. And we get a recap of really Mickie's obsession with Trish Stratus. And this is essentially, going back to, Mickie's eventual entrance into the company. And now they're teaming up together. And we, it's a standard women's match. It's not exactly where we are today. It's standard work rate. Mickie and Trish definitely are great. Victoria is fantastic. But this was still in the scope of, we're not quite where women's wrestling goes. And there's a lot of the innuendo during this match, and we see Mickie and Trish getting the win after the Stratusfaction. It was a really quick match. After the match, Mickie says this is goodbye, but she wants to tell it the right way. She tries to kiss Trish, but only gets the cheek. And then Mickie hits the chick kick, and Mickie even hits the Stratusfaction, and they're building up to, Mickie and Trish. And there's a lot of the stuff that goes on between Mickie and Trish, that a couple spots, and I think they edited out of the network, but there's some really, you want to talk about some edge on the product. There's some stuff in this match that, she really, Mickie really turns up to 11. So, and again, I think they cut it out of the match. I think it's on the original DVD, but some of the stuff she did with Trish in that match definitely upset some sponsors for sure, especially on the largest stage of them all. But we get this WrestleMania rundown of the card, and they now added Booker T versus Boogeyman. And we have Mark Henry and Daivari in for a chat. We know Mark Henry's getting ready for his match with The Undertaker. It's a coffin match, which, pretty good build to this. And after the video of Henry attacking Undertaker and the casket being set up, Daivari is ranting about how Mark Henry isn't scared of anything, including Taker, and really setting up the stage for eventually the gong to be hit. And the Druids bring out the casket. Out comes Taker himself. And after the long entrance, here we are with Mark Henry and the Undertaker going at it, and they head outside with Undertaker just throwing him into the steps, choke slamming Daivari into the casket. He hits the tombstone and puts him in the casket, and Henry just leaves Daivari like, I'm out of here. So we're eventually going to see the two of them go at it with a really, really hard-fought match. Mark Henry is he's not quite at the Hall of Pain yet, but you could see the edge of him here where, obviously Taker saw something in too, having one of these matches with him at WrestleMania. Even in a losing effort, he feels like he's on the right track where he's eventually going to become, who his best run, which is coming up very, very soon, the Hall of Pain stuff. So we go into our main event here. It's Shane McMahon and Shawn Michaels in a street fight. And goddamn, what a street fight it was. Vince is out here with Shane, and we're off to the races from the beginning. Shawn runs up the ramp. He jumps on Shane, and his chair goes over Shane's back, and Shawn's just like loading up a table, and Vince is getting involved, of course, because clearly this is a street fight with no rules, and Vince gets a cheap shot. He throws Shawn down, and then Shane kind of has the upper hand for a bit. Shawn returns to, try to figuring out a way to get back ahead, especially with the 2-on-1. Shawn is not staying on the table after being placed there, and he superplexes Shane from the ladder in the ring through the tables on the floor. So this happens all very, very quickly. So to set the stage, the ladder is up in the ring, and he climbs up, and Shane's up there with him. And he superplexed him from the ring into the floor with the table set up, and it was just absolutely insane. And that sends you to commercial break. Of course, no commercials on the network, and we're back in the ring. Shawn is knocking Shane down, and he's loading up the ladder in the corner, and Shawn climbs the ladder again, and then Vince comes in and it's like, that's enough. He hits a few kendo sticks to Shawn's back, and Shawn is climbing down the ladder, and Shane is trying his best to get his wits about him. But of course, like we said, he took that superplex through the tables, and he's worse for wear, of course. Shane drops the ladder on Shawn's back, and Vince is smiling. They're putting the camera on Vince's face, and we have the double arm crank, and Shawn is up with a DDT, and here we are with the comeback for Shawn Michaels, flying forearm into the nip up, and the top rope elbow connects. He's tuning up the band. Sweet Chin music's coming, and he hits the sweet chin, 1, 2, and then Vince pulls the ref out. Shawn's pissed. Obviously, he goes and looks for Vince. Shane gets the low blow, puts him in the sharpshooter, and God damn it, we have the Montreal 97 screwjob finish. Vince calls for the bell, and then JR has an absolute fantastic call, whether anyone remembers it or not. Quote, Michaels has been castrated of his dignity. So, man, JR making moments feel really, really big. Just absolutely amazing. But the most memorable thing about this match, and of course it wasn't that long of a match, but the superplex was kind of like the climax of the match, and they put it right in the beginning. So I think really, if you're watching this, it builds up the anger. You want Shawn to get his hands on Vince. He gets screwed over here, and you really want him to get annihilated. And you do get that happening. Like Vince really gets absolutely destroyed in this match. And that's kind of the roadmap for that type of match. It's a story building match, but it also was very entertaining. Like I really enjoyed this. And I know people kind of, Shane McMahon washes over you a little bit, especially with the overexposure, and everyone remembers him tearing his quad at WrestleMania. But man, Shane in these matches really showed up, especially when you can put all the stuff in between to kind of hide the flaws. Like he showed in these matches, matches against Kane and the matches against Test and Steve Blackman and even Vince himself at WrestleMania 17. Shane rose to the occasion. And man, what an epic match with Shawn Michaels, and then even better match at WrestleMania, which is going to be happening 2 weeks from here. So absolutely great stuff. So an absolutely great main event here. Like I said, this is like a big commercial for WrestleMania. And like, even though it felt that way, I think on a one-off, it probably was annoying to watch, like being invested in the product, but on just like kind of dropping in like a UFO and just plopping into the timeline, it was fun. Like, it's not something you need to see, but it's not something you would overly like be upset that you put on. It immediately brought me back to 2006, and the energy's there. You can feel the buzz of WrestleMania as they approach. Like, you really feel that they're building up to something special, and it's almost palpable the time of the year. Like, you could feel that they're approaching sort of the next level, like turning into, third or fourth gear. And that's really what WWE did. They kind of coasted for a bit, but once they got to the Rumble, they went all the way through. And that might be the same today, but I think at this point, we talked about this on Wrestling Tonight. We talked about this on other avenues, but the wrestling calendar has changed, where it's not just January to April at this point. Now it's kind of all year round. You have to put out the best product in order to compete, because there's money to be made and product to be watched. And I think AEW having their calendar kind of peak in May, and now they have All In August, and we have no longer is it just WrestleMania is the ultimate season. We have great product from year to year. But I have to say the Saturday Night's Main Event was really good, but this was more of a nostalgia trip, and it was really, really, really a diametrical difference watching from 1992 to 2006 for a lot of reasons. The difference in Saturday Night's Main Event for function, but also just where the company was. Like, it's night and day from where they were and finding their way through. And can you imagine in 1992 showing someone 2006 product and seeing where they went? And 2006 is certainly not the same product we're seeing today. And like, I would take 06 way over 2023 WWE as far as in-ring goes, and just the characters and just the edge. Like, I feel like there's still the edge to the product where we don't get that anymore. And I think with the PG era and, just being a corporate sponsor and moving towards a generalized public, there's still the residual effect of the Attitude Era that lingers on this product. And it's all the way in 06. We're still 7 years removed from 99. And it still feels like there's a little bit there. The Kiss My Ass Club with Vince McMahon and some of the, the other angles that feel like it's from a bygone era, but in a good way, because the product feels a little bit more edgy. And like I think Chad says it all the time, buffing out the edges. It feels like this product in 06, way more rough edges, just like the product as, a spiritual feeling as a wrestling fan watching that product, like the product and love, not this glossy, Technicolor version that they do with, I think once they started doing those big hologram graphics above the entrance ramp with Becky Lynch and Roman Reigns, that might be the marked change of, when things started going in a direction that maybe isolates a lot of fans when they want a little edge to their product. But that being said, let's get to the chaser, and we'll pick our favorite part from this week. I'll pick my favorite part. Let's get our chaser.
The chaser.
All right, here we are at the Chaser, and the fact that we have two events from two very different eras. I'm going to pick a match from each of these Saturday Night's Main Events, and I make the rules here. So we are definitely going to pick something from this 1992 Saturday Night's Main Event. I have to go Shawn Michaels versus the British Bulldog to win the Intercontinental Championship because how memorable it was. Like, this is his first single championship, first championship, to see where Shawn Michaels is, and just comparing it to the Shawn Michaels we got in 06, where so much has happened 7 years from this point, or 6 years from 1992. He's going to break his back and have to retire, and comes back in 02, and we're 4 years into that run. Just seeing just Shawn Michaels just on both ends of his career and still giving it his all. So the match with the British Bulldog, 100% pulling that from there. I also love Bret versus Papa Shango, but sticking with the Shawn match. And I got to say, man, I love the Shane McMahon Shawn Michaels match in the street fight. Again, a lot of gaga, a lot of build up to this match where eventually you want to see Vince and Shawn go at it. But there's a lot of good stuff in this match. And the reasons why you love sports entertainment, because it's just so ridiculous, so over the top. And Vince McMahon is a character. And if you would have showed someone in 1989, Vince McMahon having people kiss his ass and getting hit with chairs and stuff, it's just really fun to see. Even Shane, that little guy who was a referee wearing that blue shirt and a black bow tie, out there taking bumps off the top of the apron through a table. Really good stuff. Overall, man, these shows are really, really fun. Like, I had a great time covering them. I circled this on the calendar as like, can't wait to check this out because of just the difference of the time gap. Because I don't think there's going to be any other season, barring us, picking a season that would account for it, to jump that far in one episode and have the conversation from 1992 and 06 and immerse ourselves in both the timeline of the newsletter and also the events and really understanding what's going on. And man, it was definitely a time jump, but well-deserved, because it really set the stage for where WWE is now. And I think it would be a very similar conversation if we covered an event from 06 and then also covering, event 14 years later. So here we are kind of approaching that with, looking at the product through the eyes that we have today in 2023, and also taking in the context of what we've covered through 1985. But really, really good episodes of action that we're moving in a direction where they're becoming more fun to watch. And the work rate for me is moving in a direction where there's at least 2 or 3 matches on each card that feel really good. And especially, I mean, you could kind of push the 2006 one out of your mindset because it's a nostalgia vehicle and it's not about Saturday Night's Main Event to build because Raw and SmackDown were doing that job. It was more to scratch the itch of the fans that want a retro type of feel. But still, they gave it the Raw, and it definitely helped, as they mentioned in the newsletter, get WrestleMania 22 a little bit more buzz, especially on NBC. This was a time where wrestling was on a downward slope a little bit. They weren't having the same conversations in the mainstream. They didn't have that big star. They didn't have The Rock. I mean, John Cena was emerging to be the guy. Stone Cold was kind of there, not active. It was a weird period where there wasn't this franchise player, but they did their best on putting most of the action on. And the roster is pretty damn stacked. Like I mentioned, that match with the 2 main events, John Cena, Triple H, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, going out there. That's pretty damn good, especially with the legacy. All 5 guys are just Hall of Famers, first ballot, no dispute. So absolutely amazing stuff here. But it's time to close our tab. We have the lights coming on the bar. We're going to be previewing next week and getting our weekend started here at the tavern. Let's close the tab.
Closing the tab.
All right, time to close the tab here as we preview what's coming up next week. And of course, this is episode 16, which means sequentially episode 17 is next. And we've been talking about it. There's 18 episodes in the season, so you do the math. We don't have that many left, but next week we're going to be covering Saturday Night's Main Event number 33 from July 15th, 2006 at the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Texas. Main evented by Edge and John Cena for the WWE Championship, followed by May 28th, 2007 at the Air Canada Center in Toronto, Ontario, the night before One Night Stand, headlined by Batista and Chris Benoit, taking on Edge and MVP. So 2 interesting matches, and 07, 08, very, very 06, 07 is definitely a different time of wrestling, and we're moving towards that, and the rosters are different, and it's the John Cena age, and we're going to definitely be talking about what's going on in the newsletter and what's happening with Saturday Night's Main Event, and there's a lot to really unpack here, but I'm really looking forward to it. There's a lot of conversation that will continue. Hopefully Belcast will be back with me, but like I said, we only have 2 more episodes left here as we approach the end of Season 5. And as we look forward to season 6, we're going to be doing that in bulk, but it's not going to be returning until about July 2024. So a lot of time to catch up here for season 1. We're going to be dropping each episode Saturday for audio, WCW 1996, since everyone's been requesting it. It's living on video, so if you'd like to go back and check it out now, you could, but I'm going to be stripping the audio down and dropping it on Libsyn and putting it on all the platforms, Spotify, Apple, wherever you find your podcasts and listen to them. We're going to be putting them in audio form. So just keep that in mind when they drop on Saturdays. We may be talking about current day product that doesn't exist. Just keep in mind that product dropped. This is so long ago that we did this. So if there's any modern day conversation, keep that in mind. Especially even I went back and listened to the first episode when I stripped the audio down, and just the podcasting style. And obviously it was the first time Belcaster and I ever worked together in full. It's a different approach, and you could see the growth of the show, and it's fun. WCW was such a fun season because 1996 was, one of the reasons I fell in love with doing the retro wrestling type of stuff and covering that in full. It's going to be great to go back and listen myself. And I'm glad it's going to have a space to live, because I think for so long I wanted to find a time to put it on, but like with the schedule of the tavern, and it's all good stuff, we don't have the benefit of just dropping in audio in bulk. I don't want it to be inundated or lost in the cycle. So I figure on Saturdays at whatever time in the morning it drops on audio, it will live there. You guys can check it out. It will give us a 30-week breather to figure out what's going on with NXT. And it seems like Matt from Extra Cooler is going to be joining on full time for that season. So round of applause for that. Very excited. So he's going to be doing that in full. And I think we're going to start banking episodes as soon as, maybe the beginning of the year. Put them in the bank and then start downloading them and making them ready. So this way, when the time comes, when those 30 weeks are over and all the WCW seasons finish, episode 1 through 30 dropping on audio, we'll be ready to drop all those NXT seasons, all the takeovers. I have the schedules. I have everything ready for it. I'm going to start pulling the notes and all the newsletters and talking about even more modern day product, which is going to be amazing to see what that NXT Black and Gold became and following through. And a lot of really good stuff on the horizon for Shot Nostalgia. And it's, even though we're taking a 30-week hiatus as far as live programming, you're still going to get the audio drops. We're still going to be talking about retro wrestling. There's still going to be a lot of stuff on the horizon. It's not like we're disappearing forever, but it's a good time to recalibrate. The NXT takeovers are going to be covering from the first episode. I pulled the schedule up. July 26, 2024. We're going to be coming takeover number 1 from May 29th, 2014. Fatal 4-Way from September 11, 2014. Our final episode being November 22nd, 2024. We're covering In Your House from June 13th, 2021, and then takeover number 36 from August 22nd, 2021. So we're going to bridge the gap all the way in between all the things you love. The Brooklyn shows, Chicago shows, War Games, Philly, the one on Andrade, and all the great matches with Gargano and Ciampa, the WrestleMania lead-ups, and looking at the rosters and what they became. This is like really the precursor for a golden age of wrestling that we know and love today. So 2014 to 2021, that's going to be the timeline in between. And that's going to be season 6. Like I said, July 26, 2024 will be that first Friday we drop it. And then every Friday after that, every week remaining for 18 episodes, and the audios will drop the next day. So there will be no lapse in programming for audio listeners. So if you're listening to this, you're going to get the WCW season. And even if you joined for the ride and checked it on the video when it first came out, go back and listen again. Watch those Nitros, watch those Clash Champions, watch those pay-per-views, because 1996, what a time to be a wrestling fan. One of the more influential times for sure. And like I said, the best part about doing that is Matt's going to be joining us, and he was at some of these takeovers. I was at some of these takeovers, and it's so fresh in our brain, but being able to revisit after a short period of time, it's definitely going to bring a different perspective to this season. But as I said before, make sure you guys check out the rest of the stuff we're doing here at the Turnbuckle Tavern. You go to theturnbuckletavern.com for all your needs. The holidays are coming up. Pick up some shirts for everybody. I know that we have some great shirts on there for Wrestling Tonight, if you guys are into that. Some classic Tavern shirt, like I said before. If we see a Tavern shirt at Dynamite, at Raw, at SmackDown, and we see it, we're going to seek you out, and I'm going to send you stickers. Like, I will buy you a shirt. That is the goal for this year, 2024. We want to see that Tavern logo front and center at these events, because that's how we spread the word. We're at 12,000 followers on Instagram. The listeners are going up and up on all these shows we're doing, but we want to just spread the good word of pro wrestling and continue to grow the community. Check out the debate from last Sunday. Hal Haney was on it, the great Hal Haney. I got art all around me in this room from Hal Haney, that great Taker piece. There's a great Chris Jericho piece that he did that's also in here. Check out his work at Hal Haney. Like, the dude is just absolutely epic. If you love that the CMFTR shirt that exists, yeah, he made that. So the dude was on there, and what a great conversation. Brought a great topic to the debate. Top 5 fat guys in wrestling. That's following up with his last appearance where he talked about the top mullets in all of wrestling. So Hal Haney brings the heat. Make sure you guys check it out. And, also check out Wrestling Tonight. We also just kind of talked about, Chad and I were talking about the remaining episodes of Wrestling Tonight because we are approaching 1 year, believe it or not. And there's a lot of conversation about what's going on with, the year, and kind of like everyone does their own superlatives and talking about the end of the year. But Chad and I were talking about, especially like if you look at the way the calendar runs, we would be dropping an episode on New Year's Day, and we're also dropping an episode on Christmas Day. So we're going to be obviously taping probably in advance somewhere, so this way we can spend time with our families. But we're going to be having content straight through. But we are going to be doing an episode, especially that's going to be airing on January 1st, 2024. If you saw on my Instagram, there was a logo for the Tourneys, which is going to be the 2023 year-end awards, the first annual Tourneys, which is going to be myself and Chad giving superlatives for our match of the year, wrestler of the year, all different things you can talk about, pay-per-view of the year, promotion of the year, booker of the year, whatever. We're going to come up with categories, give out the awards. We're definitely going to have a listener type of portion where we're going to do some voting. We'll put it on our Instagram stories to see the results of that. I'm really going to look forward to constructing what this is going to look like with Chad about just kind of putting to bed 2023 and looking towards 2024 and looking at what the year was and what was his match of the year. And I'm sure it will spark some great conversation, but that's what we're going to be doing here at the Turnbuckle Tavern. And we always appreciate the support that you guys give us at all times. Like I said, wish Mike Belcaster happy birthday. Today is his birthday. So reach out to him at Mike Belcaster on Instagram, send him a message, tell him you love him, tell him happy birthday. And also you guys follow me at ACEFIELD Retro. And also, want to shout out everyone that came out to Rad Pro Wrestling, Amesbury, Massachusetts, Forever Rad 1994. As we approach end of December, there's a lot of conversation about Restival coming up, and Remarkable Wrestling is going to be in Worcester. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be in Port Jefferson for Back to the Hotel at Remarkable Wrestling ring announcing. So if you're in that area, come out and check it out. Desmond Cole defending against Adam Priest. But goddamn, there's a lot of great stuff coming up down the horizon as we approach the end of the year. Like I mentioned, Remarkable is being in Worcester for Youth of the Nation. Maybe I'll still stay in town for the whole weekend. You guys would see me there. Restival I think there's like 15 shows happening that weekend. So if you guys are in the Massachusetts area or want to make a weekend of it, come check it out. It's going to be an absolute blast spending time at wrestling fans. But like I sit here and talk to you guys all day, we really appreciate the support. Thanks for hanging out with me on a Friday, keeping me company here. It's always tough to go solo, but you guys make it worth it. Love talking about retro wrestling, but we'll return to you next week, of course, talking all things wrestling. Make sure you guys follow us at Turnbuckle Tavern. Follow me at ACEFIELD Retro, and we'll talk to you after a while.